Latin American mainland, revolutionary ideals were taken up by Creoles, born of European ancestry in the Americas. Creoles were well educated and aware of the ideals behind the revolution in North America and France. They considered themselves superior to the mestizos who were born of European and Indian parents. Colonists who were born in Spain and Portugal are known as peninsulares, felt superior to everyone. At the bottom of the social ladder were the enslaved Africans, indigenous populations, and mulattoes, those of African and either European or indigenous ancestry. Some of these social distinctions remain today. There were many reasons for discontent in the colonies, each of which encouraged some people to desire independence from Spain. Many Creoles were wealthy owners of estates, mines, or businesses. They opposed Spain's mercantilism, which required colonists to buy manufactured goods only from Spain and sell products only to Spain. Creoles wanted more political power. They resented that Spain tended to give important government jobs in the colonies to peninsulares. Mestizos wanted political power and a share of the wealth of the colonies. Many had jobs in the towns or worked in the mines around the estates of the peninsulares and Creoles. The Bolivar revolutions. In many parts of South America, the desire for independence from Spain grew among the Creole class, fearing the masses that Creoles refused the support of mestizos, indigenous people, and mulattoes, people of mixed African and European heritage. The Creoles had seen the result in Haiti of a slave uprising, as well as the excesses of the French Revolution during the Reign of Terror. Some Creoles, such as Simon Bolivar, continued to push for Enlightenment ideals in Latin America. He prompted independence of areas that became Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru. Bolivar was born in Venezuela in 1783 to a family whose ancestors had been village aristocrats in Spain. The family had grown very wealthy in Venezuela, and Bolivar had access to this wealth for his revolutionary causes. After considerable military success in Latin America, fighting the Spanish, his forces achieved the formation of a large area that he called Gran Colombia. He hoped it would become a federation similar to the United States, one based on Enlightenment ideals. He described himself as a liberal who believed in free markets and the abolition of slavery. Bolivar's goals and concern for Latin America outlined in his Jamaica letter. Generous souls always interest themselves in the fate of people who strive to recover the rights of which the Creator and nature have entitled them, and one must be wedded to error and passion not to harbor this noble sentiment. The new nations of Latin America suffered from the long wars of independence. Armies loyal to their generals led to the rise of the caudillos, strong local leaders with regional power bases. These men intervened in national politics to make or break governments. Sometimes the caudillos defended the interests of the regional elites, and sometimes of the indigenous population, the peasants. But in general, they disregarded representative forms of government and the rule of law. Results of the Creole revolutions. Although the constitutions of the newly independent countries in Latin America legally ended slavery and some social distinctions, governments were often conservative. The first constitution of Peru, for example, forbade voting by those who could not read or write in Spanish, which effectively denied most indigenous people the vote until the Constitution was changed in 1860. The Creoles formed powerful and conservative upper class as they had before the wars of colonial independence. Women gained little from the revolutions in Latin America. They were still unable to vote or enter into contracts. Most women received little education until late in the 19th century, and most remained submissive to men. One notable exception was Manuel Sainz, who was the lover of Simon Bolivar. Manuela Sainz. She actively participated in fighting alongside Bolivar, for example, in 1822 in a battle near Quito, Ecuador. An excellent rider as well as a courageous fighter, she rose to the rank of colonel On one occasion, she saved Bolivar's life, for which she received the nickname Liberator of the Liberator. Later challenges to Spanish colonialism. Spain's grip on parts of its empire lasted through the 19th century, and the Caribbean, Puerto Rico, and Cuba were among its final colonial holdings. Both islands saw uprising against Spanish rule beginning in the year 1868. While many individuals and organizations contributed to the spirit of revolution in Puerto Rico, the role of Lola Rodriguez de Tio was unique. A recognized poet during an era of little educational opportunity for women, Rodriguez de Tio became famous for her eloquent critiques of Spain's exploitative rule over Puerto Rico. Her home became a meeting place for political thinkers and revolutionaries. At such meetings, she began to read lyrics to a revolutionary song, La Borquina, which encouraged her fellow Puerto Ricans awake from their sleep, for it's time to fight. The 1868 uprising forced Rodriguez de Tio into exile in Venezuela. She was allowed to return in 1885, but her critical writings again ended in exile, this time in Cuba. Once there, she wrote and worked for Cuban independence, earning her exile from there too to New York. She returned to Cuba in 1899 and spent her remaining years as a campaigner for social justice there. Revolt in the Philippines. The Philippines, too, remained a Spanish colony throughout the 19th century. Educational opportunities, even for well-to-do Filipinos, were limited and controlled by religious authorities. As a result, many young men, often Creoles and mestizos from wealthy families, traveled to Europe, especially Madrid and Barcelona, to attend universities. An atmosphere of nationalist fervor and republicanism, inspired by Enlightenment thinking, existed in the 1880s in Europe, and these Filipino students embraced it. Jose Rizal became the most prominent of these young agitators, all of whom contributed to magazines, pamphlets, and other publications advocating for greater autonomy for the Philippines, called the Propaganda Movement. It did not call for a revolution or independence, but Spanish authorities viewed its members with suspicion. Rizal's arrest in 1892 and execution in 1896 shocked Filipinos and helped spur the first nationalist movement, with the organization and strength to truly challenge Spanish rule. A serious military upheaval of the Philippine Revolution began in 1896. As nationalism spread beyond Europe, people often created an identity under one government where none had existed before. Nationalism increased in France and in other areas of Europe and in the Americas. More than in the past, people felt a common bond with others who spoke their language, shared their history, and followed their customs. Nationalism thrived in France and beyond its borders, in areas conquered by Napoleon, particularly those in the Germanic areas of the declining Holy Roman Empire. Nationalism was a unifying force that not only threatened large empires, but also drove efforts to unite people who shared a culture into one political state. Italian unification. Count de Cavour, the Prime Minister of Piedmont, Sardinia, led the drive to unite the entire Italian peninsula under the only native dynasty, the House of Savoy. At the time, the region was divided among a patchwork of kingdoms and city-states, and most people spoke regional languages rather than Italian. Cavour himself spoke French better than he spoke Italian. Like other classical liberals, he believed in natural rights, progress, and constitutional monarchy, but he also believed in the practical politics and reality, which came to be called realpolitik. Thus, he did not hesitate to advance the cause of Italian unity through manipulation. In 1858, he maneuvered Napoleon III of France into a war with Austria, hoping to weaken Austrian influence on the Italian peninsula. Napoleon III backed out of the war after winning two important battles, partly because he feared the wrath of the Pope, who did not want his papal states to be controlled by central Italian government. Nevertheless, it was too late to stop the revolutionary fervor, and soon several areas voted by plebiscite or popular referendum to join Piedmont, the Kingdom of Sardinia, to aid the unification effort. Cavour adopted the radical romantic revolutionary philosophy of Giuseppe Mazzini, who had been agitating for Italian risorgimento since early in the 19th century. Cavour also allied with the Red Shirts, military force led by Giuseppe Garibaldi, who was fighting farther south in the Kingdom of Naples. German unification. In Germany, nationalist movements had already strengthened as a result of opposition to French occupation of German states under Napoleon Bonaparte. Following the Congress of Vienna, which settled the Napoleonic Wars in 1850, revolutions occurred in a number of European states, including Prussia and Austria. The revolutions of 1848 were the result of both nationalism, especially desire for independence, and liberalism, a desire for representation under constitutions that recognized civil liberties. Prussian leader Otto von Bismarck, who like Cavour favored realpolitik, used nationalist feelings to engineer 3 wars to bring about German unification. Bismarck manipulated Austria into participating in 2 wars, the first with Prussia against Denmark and the second between Prussia and Austria. After winning both wars, Bismarck manipulated France into declaring war against Prussia. His armies beat the French soundly in the Franco-Prussian War. In each of these 3 wars, Prussia gained territory. In 1871, Bismarck founded the new German Empire, made up of many territories gained from the wars, including Alsace-Lorraine, an area long part of France on the border between France and New Germany. Global consequences. By 1871, 2 new powers, Italy and Germany, were on the international stage. In an environment of competing alliances, balance of power would be achieved briefly through these alliances, but extreme nationalism would lead to World War I. Unification did not solve all Italian troubles. Poverty in Italy, more in the south than in the north, led to considerable emigration in the late 19th century, particularly to the United States and to Argentina, where the Constitution of 1853 specifically encouraged immigration, the movement of people into the country from other countries. Balkan nationalism. The Ottoman Empire had been the dominant force in southeastern Europe for centuries, but for many reasons, the 17th century saw the beginning of its long, slow decline. A failed attempt to conquer Vienna in 1683 signaled the beginning of successful efforts by Austria and Russia to roll back Ottoman dominance in the Balkans. It was largely due to increasing involvement in contact with Western European ideals and power that Balkans nationalism developed. In Greece, which by 1800 had been under Ottoman control for more than 350 years, increased contact with Western ideas meant exposure to Enlightenment principles, also meant exposure to the reverence with which Greece and its ancient culture were viewed across Europe. Together, these developments helped reawaken Greek cultural pride and stoke the fires of Greek nationalism. A protracted civil war against Ottoman's forces brought some success. However, it took the intervention of a British, French, and Russian fleet, which destroyed an Ottoman fleet in 1827, to help assure Greek independence. Events in other Greek Balkan regions, such as Serbia, Bulgaria, and Romania, followed a similar but by no means identical course. The warning of Ottoman control led to greater freedom and influx of new ideas, including nationalism. People began to rally around important cultural markers such as language, folk tradition, shared history, and religion. Later, outside powers such as Russia or Austria aided in achieving independence. Ottoman nationalism. The 1870s, 1880s saw the development of the Ottoman state of Ottomanism, a movement that aimed to create a more modern, unified state. Officials sought to do this by minimizing the ethnic, linguistic, and religious differences across the empire. Taking control of local schools and mandating a standard curriculum was a major part of this drive, but the effects of nationalism were not limited to Balkan territories and Ottoman officials. Ethnic and religious groups within the Ottoman Empire had nationalist urges of their own. They viewed Ottomanism with suspicion. Ironically, this attempt to create a more unified state actually served to highlight and intensify people's feelings of difference and promote their desire for independence. The future of nationalism. While nationalism continues to shape how people view themselves and their political allegiances. Some signs suggest that nationalism might be starting to decline. In Europe, many countries have agreed to use the same currency to allow people to travel freely across borders and coordinate public policies. These changes might reflect a shift away from nationalism and towards a larger political grouping like city-states and empires. Nations might someday give way to other forms of political organization. That is 5.2.